Every word spoken in the dark eventually finds its way back into the light of day. Join us as we explore the haunting echoes of past mistakes and the powerful stories of people finding their way home. Hit that subscribe button now and let the journey truly begin.
There's a diner on the corner of Millbrook and 5th that I've been going to for 31 years. Same booth every Tuesday morning. Window seat, left side, where the sun comes in at just the right angle and hits the coffee steam in a way that makes the whole thing look almost peaceful. I'm a creature of habit. Always have been. My late wife used to say I'd eat the same breakfast until the day I died, and she wasn't wrong. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. The waitress, a young woman named Brianna who started there maybe 4 years ago. She puts the order in before I even sit down now. That Tuesday in October, I remember the leaves were doing that thing they do in Ohio where they turn so bright it almost looks fake, like someone painted the trees overnight. I drove past the old hardware store my father used to own, now a cell phone repair shop, and I felt that familiar ache you get when a place remembers you, but doesn't belong to you anymore. I was 63 years old, retired from 28 years as a structural engineer, and my life had settled into something I'd describe as quietly content. Not exciting, not dramatic. Quietly content. I ordered my eggs. I read the newspaper. Actual paper, not a screen. I tipped Brianna $4 because that's what I always do. I had no idea that by the following Sunday, everything I thought I knew about my own son would be turned completely upside down. My son's name is Daniel. He's 34, works in commercial real estate, has his mother's jawline and my stubbornness. We've always been close, the way fathers and sons can be close without talking about it much. Fishing together, working on the truck together, sitting in the same room watching the game without needing to fill every silence. After his mother passed 4 years ago, we got even closer. Loss has a way of pulling people together or tearing them apart, and I'm grateful it did the former for us. He married his wife. I'll call her Sandra. About 6 years ago. She's from a different kind of family than ours. Not bad, just different. Her parents had money, the kind of money that makes you forget things, cost something. Sandra grew up in a house with a cleaning service and a lawn crew, and I don't hold that against her. But I noticed early on a certain way she had of looking at things and people, like she was calculating their value. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself every father thinks no one is good enough for his child. I kept my mouth shut and I smiled at the wedding, and I meant it mostly. Their house is about 40 minutes from mine. A big colonial in a subdivision where all the mailboxes match, and the homeowners association sends you a letter if your grass gets half an inch too long. Daniel works long hours to afford it. Sandra works part-time at a boutique in the nicer part of town, the kind of place that sells candles for $40 and calls them artisanally. I never said anything about that either. I visited them maybe once or twice a month. Sunday dinners mostly. Sandra cooked well when she wanted to, which was often enough to make me feel welcome. I watched my son come home tired and watched his wife kiss him hello, and I thought, this is fine. This is a marriage. All marriages have their textures. Sandra's mother, I'll call her Eleanor, was someone I'd met perhaps a dozen times over 6 years. A quiet woman, mid-70s, with soft gray hair she kept pinned back and hands that always seemed slightly cold when she shook yours. She'd had a hard life in the quiet way some people do. A husband who left when Sandra was 12, years of working double shifts at a hospital laundry, bad knees by the time she was 55. She wasn't warm exactly, but she was decent. She said please and thank you. She brought a pie to first Thanksgiving. About 8 months before that October Tuesday, Eleanor had moved into Maplewood Gardens. It's a care facility about 20 minutes from Daniel and Sandra's house. Not the nicest place in the world, not the worst. Sandra managed the whole arrangement, choosing the facility, handling the paperwork, setting up the payments. She told Daniel it was the best option in their price range. Daniel, who trusts people he loves, believed her. I had no reason not to believe her either. Until the phone call. It came on a Wednesday evening in early September. I was in the garage doing what I usually do in the evenings, tinkering with the old workbench I've been refinishing for about 2 years now. The smell of wood stain and sawdust is the closest thing I have to meditation. My phone rang, and I almost didn't answer it because I didn't recognize the number. I answered anyway. It was a woman named Patricia. She told me she was a nurse at Maplewood Gardens. She spoke carefully, the way people do when they're choosing their words, because some of them are dangerous. She said she looked up family contacts for Eleanor's file and found my name listed as an emergency contact, something Sandra had apparently set up early on, which surprised me. She said she was calling because she was concerned. About Eleanor? I asked. Yes, she said, and about some other things. She didn't want to say much on the phone. She asked if I could come by in person. She said she had a Thursday morning off and would be there early, before her shift started at noon. She said, and I remember this exactly, I've been at this facility for 11 years, and there are some things I can't look away from anymore. I told her I'd be there at 9. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in the dark, and I thought about Eleanor's cold hands and her soft gray hair, and the way she looked the last time I saw her, 3 or 4 months earlier at a Sunday dinner. She'd seemed thinner. I thought she was just aging. I hadn't looked close enough. Patricia met me in the lobby. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the kind of no-nonsense manner that tells you immediately she didn't call you there for drama. She led me to a small consultation room off the main corridor. The kind of room with 2 chairs and a box of tissues and a window that looks out onto a small courtyard where nothing was growing that time of year. She slid a folder across the table. Eleanor has been here 8 months, she said. In that time, her daughter has visited 4 times. 4. Once was for about 20 minutes. I know because I was on shift. I looked at the folder. It contained printouts of the care log, standard documentation of visits, calls, requests fulfilled and unfulfilled. Eleanor's column was sparse in a way that made my chest tighten. She's not getting her needs met, Patricia said. Not the medical ones. Those are covered under the base rate. But the human ones. She paused. Last month, she asked the front desk 3 times for a pair of reading glasses. She told them her daughter was going to bring them. They never came. She's been trying to read with a magnifying glass from the activity room. I thought about Eleanor sitting alone with a magnifying glass, trying to read. I asked, what about the financial arrangement? Sandra told my son this was a good facility, the best in their range. Patricia looked at me for a moment. Then she opened to another page in the folder. Mr. Harris, she said, because that's my name, Gerald Harris. The monthly rate here for Eleanor's level of care is $3,200. It's paid on time. Every month, I'll give them that. But, she pointed to a line I didn't immediately understand. The room she's in is our standard single. Basic amenities. There's a premium room available on the 2nd floor, east wing. Better light, larger bathroom, small sitting area. The difference is $400 a month. Eleanor asked about it when she first arrived. She was told by the person managing her placement that it wasn't available. Was it available? Patricia folded her hands on the table. It has been available for 7 of the 8 months Eleanor has been here. I sat with that for a moment. So someone told her it wasn't available, I said slowly, when it was. I can't tell you why someone would do that, Patricia said. I can only tell you what the records show. I drove home in a kind of heavy silence, the kind where the radio feels wrong so you leave it off. I thought about my son, my tired, trusting, good son, who handed over the family finances to his wife because he was working 50 hours a week and didn't have the bandwidth to manage everything. He told me that once, almost in passing. Sandra handles the accounts, Dad. It's easier that way. I hadn't thought anything of it then. I thought something of it now. I want to be clear about something. I am not a man who goes looking for trouble. I spent my career making sure buildings don't fall down. Methodical, evidence-based, patient. I don't make accusations without data. So I didn't call Daniel. Not yet. I didn't call Sandra. Not yet. What I did was what I'd do with any structure I suspected was compromised. I looked closer. Sandra had, at some point over the years, been added to Daniel's primary checking account. She managed the household bills. I knew this because Daniel had mentioned it in the same conversation. He trusted her completely. I trusted her reasonably well. Now I needed to understand what managing the finances actually meant in practice. I called Daniel that Friday evening and asked if he wanted to go fishing Saturday morning, just the 2 of us. He said yes, the way he always does, without hesitation, because that's one of the things we still do. that belongs to us, that hasn't changed since he was 12 years old, and we used to go out before dawn with thermoses of hot chocolate. We sat by the water, and I watched my son for a while. He looked tired. Not just physically, a deeper kind of tired. The kind that comes from running a long race you didn't realize you'd entered. I asked him, casual as I could, how things were going at home. He said fine. I asked about work. He said busy. I asked about Eleanor. He was quiet for a moment. Sandra says she's doing okay, he said. I've been meaning to get out there. It's been hard to find the time. When did you last go? He thought about it. And the fact that he had to think about it told me something. March, maybe, he said. April at the latest. It was October. I didn't push. I just said, we should go see her sometime, together. He agreed immediately, the way you agree to things when guilt finds you. We fished until noon, and I didn't say another word about it. That weekend, Daniel and Sandra went to a wedding in Columbus. I knew they'd be gone 2 nights because Sandra had mentioned at the last Sunday dinner. I'm not proud of what I did next. I want to say that clearly, but I also believe there are moments where you have to choose between comfort and conscience has to win. I drove to Maplewood Gardens on Saturday afternoon with a box of paperback novels, large print, and a pair of reading glasses and 2 different strengths that I'd bought at the drugstore because I didn't know which would work for Eleanor. The woman at the front desk recognized me as an emergency contact and let me through. Eleanor's room was at the end of a hallway that smelled of institutional cleaner and something that might have been lunch. It was a small room, functional. A window that looked out at the parking lot, a small television mounted high on the wall, a single chair by the bed that looked like it had come from a school cafeteria. She was sitting on the edge of her bed when I came in, and for a moment she didn't recognize me. Her eyes were uncertain, searching, and then something settled and she said, Gerald. Well. Hi, Eleanor, I said. I sat with her for 2 hours. I brought her the books and both pairs of glasses, and she tried them both, and told me which one worked better with the small, precise manner of someone who has learned not to expect much and doesn't want to make a fuss. She told me she'd been watching a lot of television because it was hard to read without her glasses, and she'd been too embarrassed to keep asking the desk to repeat the message to her daughter. Too embarrassed. I thought about that on the drive home. A 74-year-old woman, alone in a room that smelled of industrial cleaner, too embarrassed to ask for what she needed. Too accustomed to the answer being no. Too trained by years of waiting to believe that asking would accomplish anything. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I'm not the kind of person who snoops. I want to say that again because it matters to me. But I had a set of facts. Eleanor's isolation, the misrepresentation about the room, the gap in Sandra's visits, the finances my son didn't closely monitor. And I needed to understand how they connected before I said a single word to anyone. Because if I was wrong, I'd damage my relationship with my son and with Sandra, possibly permanently. And if I was right, I needed to be certain. I thought about Patricia's words. I thought about the look on Eleanor's face when she said too embarrassed. I thought about my son's tired eyes at the lake. I called Patricia on Monday morning and asked one question. Was there any way to find out if Eleanor's account, separate from the room rate, the personal allowance families sometimes set up, had been accessed and how? She told me that she couldn't access financial records herself, but that Eleanor, as the account holder, could request that information. She could also authorize someone else to request it on her behalf. I went back to Maplewood Gardens on Tuesday. I brought coffee in a thermos and an apple fritter from the bakery near my house because I remembered Eleanor had mentioned once liking them. I told Eleanor what I'd found. Carefully, without accusation, without drama. I told her about the room on the 2nd floor. I told her what Patricia had shared with me about the visits. She sat very still while I talked. She looked out the window at the parking lot. I wondered, she said finally. Just that, I wondered. Then she looked at me with something in her eyes that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, but was something between the two. The expression of someone who has suspected a truth for a long time and been hoping to be wrong. She signed the authorization. I won't go into every detail of what we found, because some of it is Eleanor's story to tell and not mine. What I will say is that there was a personal account Eleanor's late brother had set up for her years ago, A small, modest account intended to cover her personal expenses and comforts at the facility. Magazines, phone credits, clothing, the reading glasses she'd been waiting 6 weeks for. That account had been accessed regularly. The person with secondary access was Sandra. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes after I left. I called my son. I didn't tell him everything on the phone. I asked him to meet me that evening, alone, at my house. He heard something in my voice. He knows me well enough. And he said, "Dad, what's wrong?" "Just come," I said. "Please." He came at 7. I made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table and I told him everything. Not rushed, not dramatic, not with accusations. I laid it out the way I would lay out an engineering problem, chronologically, factually, with the documentation Patricia had helped me assemble and the records from Eleanor's account. I watched my son's face as I talked. There's a particular expression a person makes when they're hearing something they don't want to be true about someone they love. It's not anger, not at first. It's a kind of suspended disbelief, like the mind is buying itself a few extra seconds. Daniel had that expression for about 4 minutes. Then something changed behind his eyes. He put both hands flat on the table. "How long?" he said. "I don't know exactly," I said. "At least 6 months based on what we could access." He was quiet for a very long time. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened next, because my son is a private person, and what he went through over the following weeks is his experience. What I can tell you is that he confronted Sandra, that the confrontation was difficult in the way confrontations are, when there's no clean narrative, when it's not all villain and victim, but something messier and more human. A woman who had convinced herself she was entitled, a man who had chosen not to look closely, because looking closely is hard, and trust is easier, a mother who had waited quietly in a room that smelled of cleaner and hoped her daughter would remember she existed. Sandra didn't deny it in the end. That almost surprised me. I think she'd been carrying it too, and the weight of being caught was, in some terrible way, a relief. What happened to their marriage is not mine to tell here. What I will tell you is what happened on a Saturday morning in November, about 5 weeks after that conversation, in my kitchen. Daniel called me at 8 a.m. and asked if I wanted to take a drive with him. I said yes. We drove to Maplewood Gardens together, the two of us, and we went up to the second floor east wing. The room was freshly made up. Good light through a large window, a small sitting area with 2 decent chairs, a view of a courtyard with a dogwood tree that would bloom pink in the spring. Eleanor was already there. The facility staff had helped her move her things the day before. She was standing at the window when we came in, and she turned around, and I don't know how to describe this without it sounding like something from a movie, but I'll try. She just looked at my son for a moment, and then she said very quietly, "Thank you, Daniel." And my son, my tired, good, stubborn son who has my jawline and his mother's eyes, and has made more than his share of mistakes and is doing the work of becoming a better man, put his arm around her shoulders and said, "I'm sorry it took me this long." I stood by the door and let them have that moment. On the drive home, we didn't talk much. The leaves were mostly gone by then, just a few orange ones clinging to the branches the way they do at the very end. Daniel drove. I watched the road. At some point he said, "I should have been paying closer attention." "Yes," I said, "you should have." He nodded. He knew I wasn't saying it to punish him. "You two could have just stayed out of it," he said after a while. "A lot of people would have." I thought about Eleanor with her magnifying glass, reading under the fluorescent light. I thought about how easy it would have been to get back in my truck after what Patricia told me and decide it wasn't my business. I thought about all the things we tell ourselves to stay comfortable. I thought about it, I said honestly, for about 30 seconds. He laughed a little at that. Not a big laugh. A quiet one. The kind you make when something is true. I visit Eleanor on the second Saturday of every month now. I bring coffee and something from the bakery, and we sit by the window that looks out at the dogwood tree. She's started knitting again, something she'd given up years ago because her hands hurt, but physical therapy has helped with that. Last month she showed me a scarf she was making, dark green, for Daniel. She held it up to the light to check the tension, squinting slightly even with her glasses. With the focused expression of someone who is paying close attention to something that matters. That's all any of us can do in the end. Pay attention. to the people around us, to the things that don't add up, to the quiet signals someone sends when they're too proud or too tired or too accustomed to disappointment to ask for help directly. My wife used to say that love isn't a feeling, it's a practice. It's something you do over and over, even when it's inconvenient, even when you're tired, even when it would be easier to look away. I think about that a lot these days. I think about how many people are sitting in rooms like Eleanor's room, not necessarily nursing homes, but rooms of isolation, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to choose inconvenience over comfort. I was a structural engineer for 28 years. I know that the failure of a building rarely happens all at once. It's a slow accumulation of small neglects, a joint here, a stress point there, a load-bearing wall no one checked on in too long. By the time something collapses, people are always surprised. They shouldn't be. The signs were there. Someone just stopped looking. Don't stop looking. At the people who need you. At the things that don't add up. At the quiet woman sitting by a window with a magnifying glass who hasn't asked for anything in 6 weeks because she's learned not to hope. Look closer. If this story moved you in any way, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if there's someone in your life you haven't checked on in a while, a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor you used to see more often, maybe today's the day to make that call. Leave a comment and tell me, would you have done what I did, or would you have stayed out of it? I read every single one. I've thought a lot about the moment I almost didn't answer Patricia's phone call. My hands were covered in wood stain. The number was unfamiliar. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to let it ring. I think about that a lot, not because I'm proud of myself for picking up, but because of how thin the line is. How many things in life come down to a single small decision that doesn't feel significant in the moment? Answer or don't. Look closer or walk away. Say something or stay comfortable. I spent 28 years as an engineer because I believe that if something doesn't look right, you don't assume it's fine. You check. The consequences of not checking aren't abstract. They're real, and they fall on real people. Eleanor sitting alone with a magnifying glass in a room that smelled of cleaner, waiting for reading glasses that were never coming. That was the consequence of a lot of people deciding, one by one, that it wasn't their place to look closer. I'm not interested in villainizing Sandra. What she did was wrong. Plainly, clearly wrong, and she'll carry the weight of that. But I've lived long enough to know that most harm isn't done by monsters. It's done by ordinary people who convince themselves, gradually, that what they're taking isn't really being missed, that the person on the receiving end doesn't notice, that someone else will eventually step in. That small neglects don't add up to anything serious. They do. They always do. What I keep coming back to is Daniel, my son, who is a good man, who trusted his wife with something that required his own attention. I don't say that to blame him. I understand how it happens. You're tired, someone offers to handle something, and you let them because you have 100 other things pressing on you. But trust isn't the same as abdication. You can love someone and still verify. You can delegate and still stay informed. The willingness to look, really look, at the people and situations in your life isn't a sign of suspicion. It's a sign of care. Daniel knows that now. He learned it the hard way, the way most real lessons get learned. And what I respect about him is that when he found out, he didn't negotiate with the truth. He didn't look for an explanation that would let him off the hook. He looked at what had happened, accepted his part in it, and then he did something about it. That's not a small thing. That's actually a hard thing, and he did it. Eleanor has a window now that faces a courtyard with a dogwood tree. She's knitting again. She asked me last month whether I thought dark green was the right color for Daniel's scarf, and I told her I thought it was perfect, and she nodded like she'd already decided and just wanted someone to agree. That's what paying attention gets you. Not drama, not a dramatic resolution with music swelling in the background. Just a woman by a window, knitting something for someone she loves, with enough light to see what she's doing. That's enough. That's more than enough. If there's a person in your life you haven't checked on in a while, someone who's gotten quiet, someone who stopped asking for things, maybe that's worth sitting with today. Not because something is necessarily wrong, but because the act of looking is itself a form of love. And love, as I've come to understand it, is less about the feeling and more about the choice you make, over and over, to show up and pay attention even when it would be easier not to. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and tell me, would you have made the same call? I read every single one.